Welcome, everybody. We're so excited to have this presentation from Marti Jewell, the Opening Wide the Doors, Lay Ecclesial Ministry, and Thriving Parishes. So we do have some sponsors who have made this possible for us, and with Catholic Apostolate Center, the Select International, CTU, and Conspirita. We'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end. So, but we're really thrilled to have everybody here. This will be recorded so that later on we can have it on the website. And if you know of anybody who wasn't able to join us either on Tuesday or today, they'll be able to access the information. But we're looking forward to a very compelling presentation from Marti. And so Marti, anything that you'd like to add before I introduce you?
Aside from that, I'm really excited to be here. I will create a PDF of the PowerPoint slides that will be on the website as well.
Okay. So as I would like to begin with just a little short opening prayer to just kind of get us focused and to bring us all, because some of you have been, you know, maybe coming from your places of ministry, coming back after a long day, or just, you know, having to set aside all your work. So if we can just take a moment to silence ourselves and to begin in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Lord Jesus, give us the grace to hear your voice in the midst of a global pandemic, the natural disasters that are going on, the racial unrest, and all the political uncertainty that we're all living through right now. Give us the courage and the impetus to want to accompany those who have suffered the loss of a loved one through this pandemic, or those who have lost everything that they have through one of the wildfires or the hurricanes or the tornadoes that we've experienced. And also those who suffer from violence and injustice. Guide all who minister in your name, as all of us have to cope in particular ways with the effects of the collective trauma that we're all dealing with. And it's especially being more difficult for those who are given the task of enabling and empowering others. So be with us today. We call on the Holy Spirit to give us the grace to be able to hear what we need to hear at this time that's going to help us and further our ministry. And we ask this in your name. Amen. So I'd like to, most of you know Marti. Marti's been around for a long time, but for those of you who don't, she is Associate Professor Emerita and served as the Associate Professor of Pastoral Theology at the University of Dallas, Neuhoff School of Ministry. She served on NOM's board for 7 years, and following that work, she directed the Emerging Models of Pastoral Leadership. If you're not familiar with that, please check that out, because there's so much wonderful information that came from that. This was a national research project that was funded by the Lilly Endowment. And Marti has authored several books on pastoral leadership. She continues to write into her retirement. She consults, she teaches, and she holds a doctorate from the Catholic University of America. So Marti, we're really thrilled to have you with us today.
Thank you, Kathy, and it's delightful. It's delightful that there are people I know on the call and people I'm getting to meet tonight. So just very briefly, this is what I plan to look at tonight. A recently completed FADICA study on parish vitality, so that you can see some of what we're seeing makes for thriving parishes today. And then I'm going to talk about lay ecclesial ministers, but in particular, what we're learning about lay ministers, particularly parish ministers in the COVID world. And then I hope to offer you some signs of hope at the end. I kind of hope this will be a little bit of a reflective time together. So at the end of each of the sections, I'll stop, we'll pull up the screen to see everybody's faces, and we can take questions. I'm thinking that if questions come up along the way, if you use the chat function, Kathy is going to be monitoring that for us. And she will be sharing those questions with me, but if it seems appropriate, we can open up the screen for discussion too. We'll just kind of see how that goes. So with that, I'd like to start, and I'm going to start with what might be familiar to some of you. The Spirit is inviting us into an unanticipated future. You know, I have been starting my talks with this slide and this phrase for better than a decade. For years, I've talked about a paradigm shift that's going on in how parishes provide ministry. I focused on parish vitality, on leadership, on lay ecclesial ministry. For years, we have been seeing a movement from a merely hierarchical church to a more communal one, from an institutional to a missionary church. For years, we've been called to reimagine ourselves, our ministry, who does it, how it happens, where it happens, in order to form missionary disciples. We've been watching Catholic parishes in the United States undergo profound changes and profound challenges in both demographics and structure. But I never imagined 2020. I have to admit, I never imagined anything like we've been through this past year. No one, and I do mean no one, could have foretold what this paradigm shift was going to look like, or how we would exist during a pandemic in a time of political and social unrest. I know all of our hearts tonight are with people in Louisville and across the country as we deal with the Breonna Taylor, what's happening there. So much has changed. Race and ethnicity don't matter in the hospital, you patient and caregiver alike, but we have learned that race and ethnicity do matter as we're discovering who is more significantly affected by this pandemic and by injustice. In our churches, clearly pastors are essential. We've talked about essential workers quite a bit this past 6 months, and clearly our pastors are essential. But it was quickly discovered that so are the parish staff. Okay, my favorite story, one of my favorites. Young man, a young youth minister, he works with middle school. They discovered he was the only one in the parish that could figure out what live streaming mass even meant, besides how to do it. He became the essential person in that parish very quickly. We're learning how interconnected we all are as we each play an important role in our culture and world. I'm not sure, and I've worked with this for a very long time, and I've tried to talk about how the impact pastor and staff have on a parish, and I sort of get this, oh yeah, but not me, you know? And I think as we're learning, even the mere decision of whether to wear a mask or not can impact many, many people. And for goodness sakes, right now, we're really scratching our heads and we're trying to figure out what a thriving parish looks like. So there was a study that I was invited to do by FADICA on parish vitality. It happened during most of the year 2019. FADICA is, some of you may be familiar with it, it's foundations and donors interested in Catholic activities. It's a network of Catholic funders and donors, foundations and families who have graciously invested a great deal of money in the church over the years. It's a lay organization. Members are lay, although certainly there are a few priests involved, but it is a lay group that really has wanted to support the church for a very long time. So the study that we conducted with them, we've labeled Open Wide the Doors to Christ, a study of Catholic social innovation for parish vitality. It's a study I conducted with my colleague, Mark McGilka. So this is what I would like to tell you a little bit about. Now, we were charged with several different things in the study. First of all, we were asked to put together an annotated bibliography. So we set a background limit of just arbitrarily in the past decade, in the past 10 years, what books and articles were written. Now, FADICA did something really different with the study. They said, go out and study parish vitality, and they said, go out and study social innovation in parishes. But they gave us 4 specific windows to look through: young adults, Hispanic ministry, women in leadership, and welcoming parishes. It was really a different set of windows, I think, than people normally use when they study parish vitality. And I think it gave us a slightly different entree into the world of church vitality. As you can imagine, if you look in one window or a different window in a house, you're going to get a different view, right? So just on those 4 topics alone, plus vitality, we found over 100 books and articles written in the last 10 years. We found over 150 websites dedicated to these topics, and 35 different metric tools designed to measure parish vitality. Now, not all of these are of equal value, right? There's all kinds of variety here. But one of the things that was just so amazing is probably 95% of this material in these websites are by lay people. So one of the first things that we're discovering is, while clergy are involved in running parishes and dioceses, lay people are doing a lot of these initiatives to keep our parishes going. Now, the second half of the study, and this was great fun, we interviewed 65 people nationwide. We interviewed 35 national leaders, people that many of you might know, 10 bishops, and 20 pastors and pastoral administrators or pastoral leaders. Now, how did we pick these people, and how did we do this? Well, every single person, starting with FADICA, and then when we talked to the national leaders first, and then the bishops, and then the pastors, we said, who do you know has parishes that are really vital, at parishes where something really good is happening and we could learn from them? And we collected an amazing number of names, whether of bishops or pastors or parishes across the country. So we took those names and divided them up between large city, small city, rural areas, north, south, east, west, so that we could get as much of a range of parishes as we could. We looked at diversity in parishes, so we had some multicultural parishes in the mix. And we spent an hour with each of these leaders. We had the same interview process for all of them. And these were amazing. Mark and I together on Zoom with one-on-one with these folks. And they are confidential interviews, so people were really, there was a comfort level. And these were really, really blessed conversations. So I want to tell you a little bit about what we heard from them. First of all, on the basis of those conversations, we decided on the title for our study, Open Wide the Doors. And this is for those of you that like the big picture, we discovered enthusiastic, welcoming, engaged pastoral leaders willing to open the doors to Christ, welcoming all in, and then sending people out to follow their baptismal call to serve Christ. Gone were in these parishes was the, circle the wagons, close the doors, a fortress against the world. They were really amazing. Just met some wonderful people in the process. So what I've done is I'm going to give you 3 major categories from the study. The study itself is available to you. If you go to FADICA's website, you can find it there. That's FADICA.org. There's a link on the homepage. But I'm going to try to summarize this for you in 3 sections. Now, the first thing I want to tell you, I'm going to go back to this picture here, is there was a story that we heard from one of the parishes, a downtown parish, that captured for us the essence of this study. And I want to share that story with you. It came from how one downtown parish adapted Pope John Paul II's call when he opened the Great Jubilee year. Now, do you remember he had everybody open the doors to the cathedral and bless them, and there were indulgences to people that went through them. It was a big deal back in 2000. Open wide the doors to Christ, he said. So this particular downtown cathedral church took this Jubilee call to heart. Now, this particular church was built, well over 100 years ago. And when it was built, it was not in the middle of a downtown section. It was out in the plains. And it needed to be a bit of a fortress. They built it sort of like a fortress, and it had these huge, large, heavy wooden doors. Well, today, they're not out in the plains. They're in the center of a thriving downtown metropolis. Needing to be a fortress doesn't make any sense there. And as they listened to the Jubilee invitation, they decided that what they would do is replace the door's wooden panels with clear glass so that you could see into the church from the street. They wanted to show everybody that passed by that a Catholic parish is where all are welcome, and I'm quoting them, heritage and hope meet. Isn't that lovely? Heritage and hope meet. They took seriously the call to open the doors to Christ, and so we're going to offer this to you as a metaphor. And as I go through this, I want you to kind of keep thinking about your parish, your diocese, whether these things I'm going to talk about match, don't match. The interviewees that we talked to about how their parish opens the doors, they told us they open them to all comers. All comers, rich or poor, didn't matter, young or old, longtime parishioner or newly arrived immigrant. These parishes have a sense of offering sanctuary to the people that come needing to feel safe, understood, and cared for. We met parishes where they open the doors to homeless people during the day so they can come in and sleep in the pews. There's a whole thing that they've built around this, but I discovered, and this just stunned me, that if a homeless person get even 45 minutes of uninterrupted sleep a day, they will be able to cope with what they're dealing with. 45 minutes, folks. You know, I count how many hours I get. But they're able to offer this. Others use their kitchen and their gardens to feed the hungry. Others, I love this, help undocumented people create emergency plans so that if they are picked up and deported, somebody has the names of their children, phone contacts, and powers of attorney so those children can be cared for. People are just thinking of all the ways that they can reach out into their communities. Okay, but they also told us that doors swing both ways, right? So it's not only welcoming, but sending out that's so critical. So we heard all kinds of stories of how parishioners are sent out to share the mission of Christ doing outreach and evangelization. All kinds of creative stories, from parking lot band concerts to neighborhood teas. People are doing things. And what we discovered is that parish leaders are recognizing that we can no longer create barriers or be fortresses, but we must go beyond our brick and mortar buildings in order to be present in the city streets, rural towns, or cyberspace and social media. So think about your parish. Think about its outreach. Are your doors open to all comers? How do you go out into your neighborhoods? Okay, so now I'm going to give you the first of three categories that we surfaced in the process. And one is really innovative responses to both the culture and the context in which the pastoral leaders found them. I was truly amazed at as we listened, maybe I shouldn't have been amazed, but I was, how well bishops knew their diocese, their parishes, their parish culture, what was different in the northern part of the diocese from the southern. And we heard the same thing from pastors and parish leaders, what they knew about their parishioners and their parishioner needs in their neighborhoods. So in this category, I'm going to name these very specific things that surfaced in the study. First of all, and critically important, if I could only talk about one thing, I suppose this would be it, is the importance of relational ministry. Okay, so what people told us, and this is, I think, going to jive with your experience, that there is a longing for relationship in our world. Whether young adults, whether arriving immigrants, young parents, elders, people are asking, and these are the questions they told us people are asking. Am I welcome here? What's my experience here? How am I treated here? Does anyone here look like me? No, this one's the tearjerker. Does anybody even know I exist? And I think we're going to be talking some about in our living in this COVID world, these questions become even more and more critical. I'm teaching an online ministry course, a graduate course, and one of my students, a millennial who's a high school minister, almost verbatim told me that his students and his age group, his peers, are asking that set of questions that I just read to you, and he hasn't seen the report. That's how experienced these are. What are we doing to reach out to people? Heard just wonderful stories of very intentional outreach, which of course leads to welcoming and hospitality. We heard stories of exceptional, committed, and radical hospitality. I guess it turns out that some people are a little uncomfortable with the idea of radical, as in radical hospitality, but that's the way people talk to us. And they are so committed to welcoming people in that they talked about this. They talked about training the entire parish how to be hospitable, not just the greeters. And everybody spends a lot of time with their greeters. They talked about bringing people in from the hospitality industry to tell them how to make the grounds more welcoming, and just everything that people can do to be more hospitable. And national studies conducted by CARE have shown us this is really very high in people's list of what they're looking for in the parish. Is it welcoming? A lot more on that in the study. Intercultural ministry. This is really important. A lot of creative efforts at building bridges between cultures are going on. Now, we were asked specifically to study Hispanic ministry. This is certainly the largest growing cultural, multicultural contingent in our country, but it's certainly not the only one. And pretty much to a person, our interviewees told us that, that's not the only culture we're dealing with here. And so some of the things that we learn are generic to working in intercultural ministry. Some things are very specific to working with Hispanic ministry. We were touched by the fact that people talked about not lumping everybody together. So do you know what the heritage is of the group in your parish? Are they Salvadoran? Are they Chilean? Are they from I don't know, Spain itself? Are they from Africa, but what part of Africa? So all of those things make a difference. Not everybody prays to the same Mary. Our Lady of Guadalupe does not have the same importance to every Spanish-speaking person out there. So really a lot of effort at looking at that, at building bridges. I love the parish that does third Thursdays. And every year they invite, there's a group of parishioners that come together every third Thursday for dinner, mass, and then a guided intercultural conversation so that they can learn about each other. So lots of ideas about that. Outreach and invitation. These stories involve parish leaders recognizing that there's multiple opportunities and entry points into the community. So there's the obvious one. There's, you make a special effort at Christmas and Easter because you've got people coming back we haven't seen for a while. People know that those sacramental moments are really critically important to welcome people in. But those aren't the only ones. And I think one of the things we're seeing happen right now, and this sort of bleeds into the next one here, as we're live streaming masses, people that have not walked through the door of a church in a long time are attending Mass every Sunday. And they're doing it in such a way that they're feeling like they're part of the community again, whether these are people that just stopped going to church, whether they're the homebound and the disabled, suddenly feel like they're part of the community again. People in the rural areas, a lot of them are going out into the fields and finding the families of the farm workers, of the laborers, and then bringing them in. I love a parish in the Southern Appalachians that was literally dying. It was aging. The young people had gone off to the city, and all that was left were parents and grandparents that were aging. And they suddenly realized that all around them were farm workers who had young families, moms with babies. And they began to go out and invite those young moms and those families into their church. And that parish is thriving now because they've become comadres and compadres to these young people. So there's really all kinds of things there. Internet and online communications, how do we do this? An impactful website is critical. So if you're a young adult, or if you're like me and you're trying to find a place to go to live stream Mass this week, where do you go? You go to a parish's website, right? How good is your parish website? How impactful? How is the staff presented? I have the strange hobby of parish website hopping to see how lay ministers are presented. What do you see there? Is it welcoming? Do I see myself pictured in the photographs on the page? Do I see young people? Do I see people of color? Do I see elderly people? And one of the things we learned about is the importance of mirror websites. So the websites, our websites, particularly in our multicultural communities, need a button right on the front page that says Spanish or Vietnamese or Tagalog or whatever would be appropriate, French. And you go there. Now, there's some times when you go there, you just get some information that might be specific to that group. But the best websites are mirror websites where it's identical to the English pages, except that the language is culturally sensitive. So people are doing lots and lots of creative things there. And there's more examples in the study. Innovation. Okay, the second thing I want to talk about, these parishes known for vitality have a compelling holistic vision. And you see the three circles we have there. Leadership, pay attention to word, worship, and service. Now, obviously, these are not new areas to us. We know how important word and worship are. In an awful lot of parishes, though, service is a sort of the ragtag cousin or the last thought of, or it's that committee where there's good people and it's maybe where we put our tithe. But these parishes with vitality, the service area of the parish is every bit as critical and given every bit as much attention as word and worship. So think about that. More specifically, when it came to word, formation in the word, whether we're talking about catechesis or evangelization, often lots of people are using intergenerational catechesis. There's a lot of energy around that. And it's really interesting because we found pastors that discovered that if they do events for the little ones that mom and dad have to bring them to, mom and dad are getting catechized. That's the real reason for the event. We just didn't talk about it. A lot of the events are designed to build relationships with parishioners. Now, I'm going to suggest that an awful lot of this we can do now, even when people are not gathering on the parish grounds. So what are ways that we can do formation? And I'm going to ask if anybody has some creative ideas when we stop in a minute to share those. But can we create neighborhood groups? Can we create groups of young moms? Can we create groups of singles as we do catechesis through Zoom? Lots and lots of really wonderful ideas about this. Sacramental prep for young marrieds. where they go on a retreat with the pastor, the bishop shows up sometimes, all kinds of ideas. Worship. It goes without saying, period, that the Sunday liturgy is the most important part of the parish and parish life, hands down. I've learned a new phrase, though, that wasn't part of my vocabulary before. We talk about the Sunday experience. You might know about this as well. It is the liturgy, which is central, the source and summit, but it's also all the things that happen that are built up around the liturgy. The welcoming, the training of the greeters. Parishes use whole families to greet parishioners so that the little kids know that they're welcome too. Lots and lots of really creative ideas. The three most important things are a really good homily. And maybe we're not in charge of that, but there is a cry for homily training and recognition that they need to be uplifting. I suspect a lot of people that live stream videos turn them off right after the homily. So how important that is. Good music. I would not have appreciated before how critically important music is, because it does touch the heart and move us in a way that words just can't. One of the things that we found a lot of parishes do special Sunday evening liturgies for young adults. Now, young adults don't tend to come to church a lot, and they don't tend to come to church on Sunday morning. But these 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock and 8:30 Sunday evening liturgies are hugely successful. And I think they would be hugely successful online, every bit live streamed, every bit as much as in place. But when they do this, all of the ministers are all under 35. It's open to the community, so there's so much life here. The musicians are under 35. People with young families that couldn't get away on Sunday morning find it welcoming. All kinds of things like that. And then service, outreach to the marginalized, hungry, homeless, hurting, outreach and hospitality. One young adult I was talking to recently, a millennial, said to me he hoped that people would understand that his generation is mission driven. Now, we know that young adults tend to sort of move into two categories. They're the spirituality ones who love the Eucharistic adoration, and that's very important to them, and it does not mean to them what it meant to me when I was a youth. I'll tell you that. So it's important to pay attention to. But a lot of them really need service, these service initiatives. We raised them. We did a really good job teaching them about social justice. How are we living that out in our parishes? Food pantries. Food pantries right now are struggling with increased demand. All of this is an essential part of parish life. So, how compelling is your vision in these three areas in your parish? And the third and last one I'm going to talk about in this section is the co-responsibility of pastor, staff, and parishioners. Co-responsibility is a phrase that was coined by Pope Benedict XVI in the talk that he gave to the priests of the Diocese of Rome. You've probably heard it. It's certainly made the rounds. But he said to the pastors, no longer does anybody expect you to do everything. You can't. We are all co-responsible for the mission of the church, pastor, staff, and parishioners alike. We saw this particular kind of leadership in these parishes known for vitality. In these parishes, we found leaders who empower, delegate, and collaborate with the community. We did not see a lot of really heavy hierarchical. There were a couple of parishes like that, but by and large, this is what we saw, this whole need to engage and empower the community. And they talked about that in these communities, parishioners have a sense of ownership and pride in their communities. this is really important. These are communities where people want to bring their friends. They want to bring their families. They feel like they're contributing. They feel seen, really, in these communities. People talk to us about the need for well-trained, engaged, and relational pastoral teams. Pastor and staff working together with parishioners. Where they talked about the need to have good people skills, good specialized training, depending on your parish, but maybe intercultural competency. Maybe it's with the aging, whatever is, it's particularly true about your parishes. Like I said, we didn't hear a lot of talk about a strong hierarchical vision of parish in this group. I know they're out there, but not in this group, which was, I think, important. But it was very easy to see what we all, I think, know from experience, that the leader, now at any level, whether it's the pastor or the DRE or the liturgist, can make all the difference between a thriving parish or one in trouble. I want you to think about that. The ability to engage the community, the relationship that the pastor and staff have with each other, their relationship with the community, all of these things matter on how healthy a parish is. Good relational skills, the need to listen, and this is really listening, communicating, responding pastorally, and the need to be adaptable. This was really interesting. These were by and large very adaptable people. They allow themselves to meet the continuously changing context in which they find themselves, and they reach out. They reach out to the parish next door or the diocese across the country for ideas. They talked about how important it is for parish core teams to share in the responsibility for the parish, whether it's to challenge and really have the hard conversations with the pastor, or whether it's engaging parishioners. And I thought this was interesting. They talked about the importance of the parish staff being reflective of the local context in terms of culture, gender, age. So if you look at your core team, how reflective is it of your community? It's a really interesting question. I think what we're discovering all around is that we're looking at a new story. There's some out there, they're like glimmers, like that 1,000 points of light sort of thing, of parishes with engaged, relational, and animating leadership. You know, the Emerging Model Project coined the phrase total ministering communities, where everybody, pastor, staff, and parishioner is involved in the community. These are organic, so everybody's involved. They're dynamic, they're very active. They've got all kinds of things going on. They all have this idea that they're co-responsible for the mission, focused on the conversion that's at the heart of evangelization, and are okay with it coming from anywhere in the system. This was one of the most significant things that we heard in creating Parish Vitality. I just threw a lot at you, so we're going to stop for a second here. I'm going to turn off the screen and see, take a minute, and Kathy will begin either collecting or calling for your ideas.
So just if you can find the chat in the bottom of your screen, and just, you know, whatever, you know, if you just got a comment about something, you'd like to share something that's really working well in your ministry location, or some questions that we can put to Marti or to the entire group. So Jamie is asking if she wonders how a good staff can do, what they can do if a priest comes in who is more on the clerical model and doesn't empower the staff.
You all know there's no easy answer to this question, right?
It's like a bomb, Jamie.
This is probably one of the most neuralgic points in parish ministry. whether you've got a good or a pastor leaving and a good or bad pastor coming, this really makes a difference in parish life. And I don't have a really good answer, but what I would suggest is you behave properly anyway. You do good leadership. You do empowering and engaging leadership. I've got a few more ideas I'll mention a little bit later. And manage up. Manage up, tell the stories, and include this pastor that's more clerical. We'll know it in the fruits, and there's just no nice answer because it does matter. But I would say if you are authentic and true to yourself, and your view of ministry is the very best thing that you can do.
Yes, Sister Lois is wondering, what are some of the strategic planning steps when there is a change of pastor? I know I worked with 9 different pastors in my 30 years of parish ministry. And like you said, I don't think there's any one answer, but I know there's some good resources out there.
There are. Kathy, you should probably be doing this part of the talk. Yes, there is a series of 3 very small guidebooks called Navigating Pastoral Transitions that I would encourage everybody to find if you are in that pastor shift. One was written for the pastors, one was written for parish staff, and one was written for parish or parishioner leaders, which happened to be the one that I wrote, hint, hint. But they both talk about the process of change and really good ways to onboard the new pastor. The healthier the leave taking of the outgoing pastor is, the better the new experience is going to be. So it gives you lots of suggestions, and it has lots of suggestions for parish leaders and a lot of reflection questions. So take a look at those. You can find them on Amazon, Navigating Pastoral Transitions.
Okay, and we also, Denise is wondering if people are finding the current situation giving us an opportunity to raise up the domestic church, reaching the multiple generations. If this, this quarantine time, if we've been able to do that better.
I think this really is giving us an opportunity. I love the story of the couple whose teenage kids would never go to church with them, but they're sitting there and kind of captive in the living room on Sunday mornings. And all of a sudden they decided this is really interesting. And they would hit the pause button, because we can do that. And they would go and read the scripture passage for themselves again. And then they would hit the pause. Well, why did he say that? And yeah, I really think that we need to find ways, but I think we also need to be creative in how we engage people.
Ellen is asking if you had a chance in your work to go back to those who you talked to before, to how COVID-19 is affecting the vitality of those parishes that were vital.
We have not, and that is, I hope somebody out there will put money towards that, because it's going to be a really critical question.
Right. And Keith says that his parish went through a change of pastors from a religious order to diocesan this summer during COVID, and they did a great job. So again, it's great. That how do you exit out the old and bring in the new, I think is so critical. And then we've got another that says they'd like to hear more about the approach to evangelization. Is there going to be something, Marty, that you're going to have in there of how to approach evangelization sometime in your presentation?
That is not a specific topic that we studied apart from the whole ministry of the word. It clearly has become part of our thinking, and the only thing I can say about it at this moment is that people really have this idea of developing and forming missionary disciples. And I think that's the new phrase. Evangelization is the big buzzword for those of us in ministry, but I think this idea of being missionary is the one that's catching on.
Okay. So any last minute comments, questions before we move forward?
Okay, let's do this. Now I can get back to where I'm supposed to be. There we go. Okay, so the second part of the talk tonight is the COVID parishes. Then came 2020. The unthinkable happened. Churches were shuttered, people self-quarantined, programs were shut down. We've all been called to rethink the work of parishes, right? What is essential? Who is essential? And these are complex questions. What needed to continue? Sacramental programs, but not something else. What needed to continue? How? We began live streaming, but what about the church's other work? Formation. I have heard so many formation directors going, what are you doing? What are you doing? How are you going to get people? People are tired of Zoom. How are we going to do formation? How do we do family formation? Lots of questions about that. But the one that I think is critical and is, how are our parishes serving the poor and the marginalized right now? We can't open the churches. We can't put the pews out there. There's way more hungry and homeless than there were before the doors were locked. These are really complex questions. I think what has happened this last 6 months is our entire understanding of church has been called into question. Think about it. People are willing to risk their health to return to Mass. What does that mean? How have we come to understand the Eucharist? There's been some talk about spiritual communion. There's been some talk about, I love Augustine saying that I've been walking with through this, which is, do you understand that when you go up to receive communion, it is you, the body of Christ, who is going up to receive the body of Christ, which is you. We didn't stop being the body of Christ because we couldn't go to church and have the physical host in our hands. And so how do we find a way to understand what Eucharist means when we don't have actual access to the Eucharist? All right, so those ecclesial questions and theological questions. Then we all began to experience this collective trauma, and you haven't looked at, you might want to spend just a little time looking at the meaning and understanding of what collective trauma is. None of us gets accepted from what's happening right now. Nobody in this planet is accepted from this trauma. Even if we're safe, even if we're healthy, even if we're staying in our houses, it's impacted our lives. And the depth of personal grief. I mean, 200,000 dead in this country alone and counting, and probably many, many more. But people who have been sick, I've heard people talk about, they've had it, they've recovered, but oh, it was so hard. That's the phrase they use, it was so hard. There's grief there. We mourn loved ones, but more than that even, we're mourning the death of what has been. We're mourning the death of our ability to go to the movies or the shopping center or out to dinner, having dinner with friends. We're mourning the loss of jobs. We're mourning the ability to give our children a good meal. How do we go on after this senseless tragedy? People just want things to go back to the way they were. I get it. Sometimes I do too. That is a normal part of the trauma process, but it's also part of the denial because this can't happen. We're all facing these really complex questions. And so I'm going to suggest that what I think we are experiencing is a crisis of imagination. This is a phrase I've been using, and I've really spent a lot of time with it. And I'm defining this as the inability or unwillingness to imagine a world different from the one we already know and assumed would continue indefinitely. The inability or unwillingness to imagine a world different from the one we already know and assumed would continue indefinitely. You all know people and groups that are desperately trying to take us back to some world, some way of being church that somewhere in their past was important to them. We all know people that got absolutely paralyzed and didn't even know what to do, how to move forward in this. And this is happening at every level. Our government closed down the agencies and initiatives that were designed to deal with pandemics because they never imagined anything like this would really happen. You know, that was the stuff of movies. We see it in individuals desperate to get back to old routines, regardless of their impact on self and others. You know, I really need to go back and get my hair cut. Now I get it, you know, I get that. But even if it doesn't matter to other people, never imagining that our personal choices could potentially impact others deeply. Pope Francis tried to tell us about this in Laudato Si. He talked about the interconnectedness of all humanity. When one person is hurting, we're all hurting. When one person heals, we all begin to heal. We're so used to thinking individually in terms of our own worlds, our own circles. We couldn't imagine something like this. Think about it. Parishes had to move to live stream masses. Who would have imagined, all right, Father doing online homilies? It was a stretch. At first, remember, presiders, this was so interesting because it's something I've been watching because I've been thinking about this. The very first earliest live stream masses, people were using their telephone cameras or video cameras for the streaming, and Father did, or the presider did the liturgy just as if there were people all around, just like they had always done. And those were not really exciting live stream liturgies. And gradually some began to realize the platform had changed. Now, liturgy doesn't change, but the platform did. And so presiders learned to look at the camera. They learned to project their voices. They learned to improve the music so that it became, a little more performance music, but it still was designed to reach people's hearts. People bought better video equipment, dealt with the sound. This is what imagination looks like, the ability to see and do things differently. And I think part of what's happening is we're all experiencing that stretch. I talked about formation directors and youth ministers struggling to figure out how to do their ministries online. But I think we're all being asked to answer questions that we could avoid before about what is the nature of formation. The question about evangelization is an important one. Who does it? How is it done? These questions are really demanding attention right now. One pastoral leader told us, I am seeing with different eyes now. We used to wait for people to come to us. Now we are going out to them. You know, those phone calls. I have a lot of parishes did phone calls to everybody on their rosters early on to see if they were okay. I wonder if those phone calls are continuing. I'm going to tell you, I know people that received the phone calls. They were thrilled to death. They were 3, 4, 5-minute calls because there really wasn't a need to talk about. But somebody called me. Somebody from the parish was worried about me. Cannot tell you what that did for people. I hope those are continuing because they were critically important. So what I want to talk about is lay ecclesial ministers in this time of COVID. Okay, basically, we make up the parish staffs for the most part. We're the core team. Noam did a lot of listening sessions. We've all done our own listening on the side. And I think I'm going to name 4 pretty significant issues that came up for lay ecclesial ministers as we moved into this COVID period. Early on, maybe continuing, but certainly the very first thing that people were talking about was that they were worried about their parishioners, hence those phone calls, right? How were they managing? How were their elderly managing, the homebound? Were people getting their medicines? Were they getting food? Were they getting to doctor's appointments? We just heard lay ministers talking a whole lot about that. Then the focus shifted a little bit because collectively in this country, we developed this really intense focus on Sunday liturgies, right? So it was really interesting to hear the parish staff, the lay ministers, talking about this point in time. They did the background work. They wrote the liturgies and they pulled together the music, and they did a lot of what needed to be done in that time. But they also began to worry about a new wave of clericalism, and that's the word they were using. Is the presider, so therefore the ordained, the only one that really matters in church anymore? What's going on here? Why are we putting so much emphasis on this? How would this impact the ministry of lay ministers? You know, you don't see us on Sunday in the live streams. Other people began to worry about the emergence of some magical thinking about the Eucharist. People so desperate to get the host in their hands. What was that about? You know, the drive-in, they were in the parking lot, and it was distributed to the cars. There was a drive-through parade after Mass, and people were distributed communion. I think we're being really called to do some serious ecclesial and theological conversations around this. Okay, so time started to pass a little bit. The third set of questions that finally began to surface had to do with employment and financial well-being of lay ministers. We know, we've all heard of dioceses that laid off the entire lay staff right at the very beginning because they were afraid that they couldn't pay them. Some parishes did that. So with the specter of lost collections, who experienced the layoffs? The lay ministers did. The furloughs, the reduction in salary, the reduction in hours. And what about those that didn't? They survived, they kept their jobs, but they were given additional responsibilities with fewer resources, all the while learning how to do all of it on Zoom. I think Kathy said we needed some Zoom classes. These are serious, really serious questions that are impacting us as lay ministers, both personally because of our physical and financial well-being, but also ecclesiologically. And then finally, as we've moved on, lay ecclesial ministers, parish staffs were able to talk about the fact that they were both experiencing and ministering to the effects of this grief and trauma. After the first few months of trying to accommodate to this new norm, they were finally able to sit back and assess the impact on themselves. They were going through the trauma. I know plenty of lay ministers that caught COVID, ministering to those, and they were the ones people turned to for help through all of this. How do you minister to someone when you're grieving yourself, right? So all of these things, I think, are going on in our world. There are staffs that are coming back now. Nobody that I know has done a study on this, and I certainly hope some of our benefactors out there in the research world will look at that. But I'm going to suggest that something a little fun here in the midst of all this heaviness, that sometimes we just need to think differently, right? So this is the question I began asking myself. What would it look like if we talked about leading from the middle? We don't think about this way. We're pretty thoroughly entrenched in this hierarchical thinking, but what if we talked about parish staff as middle managers? Now, I'm not saying that's the title, but it occurred to me that parish staff are a lot like middle managers in corporations. Now, so middle managers, now think parish staff, right? Middle managers have to report to and satisfy a supervisor, think pastor. They have to collaborate and work with peers, so think of your colleagues. And then they're responsible for others, and of course the others here are parishioners. And we do know, and I think I said this before, the ability of pastor and staff to have a healthy working relationship impacts the vitality of the parish. So I'm not overlaying a business model on parish, that would be ridiculous. But I just thought it would be intriguing to think of the role of lay ecclesial ministers as middle managers and what that model what might mean for us. Could we learn anything about their ability to create success in their organizations or being enablers of growth. So I did, and I encourage you to do this. It was really kind of fun. Just a real quick search on Google for successful middle managers or best practices of successful middle managers. And some really interesting things surfaced that I think might serve us in our parishes. I'm just going to give you two here. So what I learned was that successful middle managers plan differently. They identify key goals and objectives that align to their organization's broader goals and objectives. So have you set goals and objectives for your ministry that of course align with the goals and objectives of the parish? How well have you done that strategic planning in your own area? And then ask yourself, how are they similar or different for you today? Right now, they may have changed. Your goals might be the same, but your objectives and your action steps might have changed. Are you thinking strategically? And then the second thing I learned is that they act differently too. So the suggestion here is to develop leadership skills that enable you to support those you lead in achieving your goals. Learn from your parishioners. Don't do this by yourself. Engage, delegate, animate, dialogue with, call on their wisdom. Don't do this yourself. So these are a couple of strategies, maybe will help you or not, but I'm going to stop right here. See if we can get there. Okay. We'll just take about 3 or 4 minutes here. Kathy, are there any questions, or would anyone like to talk about your experience during COVID that would help us to hear? Kathy, you're muted.
Because I am retired and I work from home for the diocese, and that actually when COVID hit, I live on a cattle ranch, so we were calving when COVID first hit. So for me, nothing really changed except for not being able to go into Mass. But I think, just seeing what people are going through and the trauma of, I mean, I was even accused one day of, because I have asthma and I feel like I need to stay home, and online Mass is all I can muster at this point. But I was actually accused of being one of those that was keeping everyone else from going to Mass. And because they were saying that, if you people would just let us do our thing and you can do whatever. But everybody is dealing with this so differently. So what are some of the things that you've been able to see of, where have you encountered that crisis of imagination? Or where?
Kathy, Kathy, I want to follow up what you just said, because you hit something that's important in dealing with collective trauma. People are angry, and it feels like they're angry at you. Don't take it personally, please. Don't anybody taking it personally.
Right.
It's not about us. It's just a part of the process. So go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, I had someone at the grocery store yesterday who made a rather snide remark because he chose not to wear a mask in a place that they were required, and I was. And so it is hard to not take these seriously. But where are some places where you've been able to see that maybe not the crisis of imagination, but where has the imagination started flowing? That we've got, Jamie talked about this interesting concept of the middle management, because those in lay ministry would work both with the pastor and the parishioners. And even though as a former pastoral associate, DRE, office manager, I always felt like I was that middle manager, but yet there was always that connection. But how do we do that in a creative way when we can't all gather, when we can't have people collectively in one space? So Ellen, I see you've got your hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself? There, okay.
I just want to share a little bit about our experience. I'm in a rural community, faith community in Western Maine. And we have 5 churches. We have 2 priests, and we have no pastoral associate. We have a half-time secretary and a 10-hour bookkeeper. That's it. That's our staff. So we are the parish leadership. Our parishes, our parishioners are the parish leadership.
Yes.
Because Father's being a priest, and we told him that was his job. Go be a priest, say mass, visit the sick, do it, say funerals, marry people, baptize them. We'll take care of everything else. And he had to say yes, because he couldn't, it was not possible to do it. And so we have a really vital pastoral council. And during COVID, we had a team of 22 people who worked every single week on Zoom and wrote and designed and sent to the bishop a new parish plan. And it was people that we call it a cluster. So our cluster we had representation from all of our worship sites, and we really wrote a beautiful pastoral plan. It goes to the bishop next week, so we're all excited, waiting to hear what he has to say. But I would suggest that, except for Southern Maine, where all the people live, actually, there's no people where I live. The people run the parishes. They have to. We take care, and during COVID, we called all of our parishioners, like you were mentioning before, and then we asked them if they had neighbors that we should call and check on that weren't people of the parish, but did they have friends they were concerned about? So we made those phone calls. And when Mass opened up again, we could only have 40 people in church. So people had to start going to other churches. So now within our cluster, people are going to Masses everywhere and meeting people they never met before. So for us, it's helped our cluster because people want to be live with someone, in church, be able to receive the Eucharist. So they're going to Mass in the next town. It's our cluster, but it's not a church they normally would go to. And so we have so much cross-fertilization now, and it's very unique to our situation.
Thank you, Ellen. You are bringing to life a lot of things I just talked about today, and we discovered that
I felt so good after hearing you talk, because I said, oh, we did that.
Check. Great. Thank you.
So it can be done. It can be done.
Yes, it can.
That's fantastic. Sister Lois is talking about how she oversees the RCIA process in her diocese, and that they're still advertising for, to see who the new inquirers are going to be, getting responses, and then figuring out how do they do that online? How do we prepare the seasons for them? Because, we're so used to, the rite of acceptance, where we're actually touching the people and all the scrutinies and the different, I'm a recovering RCIA director myself. But they're getting good numbers because people are hungry. It sounds like people are hungry for something. And Marty, is that something you found?
Very much so.
And
yeah.
Marty, if I may interrupt, what I said to the RCIA directors when we had a Zoom call is that oftentimes during crisis, people will come to the church looking for something. So don't be afraid to welcome them, to invite them in. Don't just shut down because you don't know how to do a Zoom meeting. If you have 1 or 2 people, you can meet with them individually. In Arizona, of course, we can meet outdoors for a long time before the winter sets in. Our 3 days of winter usually in January. But so I've been really impressed. There's about 10 or 15 of our 40 parishes that usually have a pretty active RCIA. There's about 10 or 15 who have reported to me that they're getting people and figuring it out. So I just am pleased that they haven't frozen, been paralyzed by the reality, which is how I was at the beginning. I thought, what? How do we do this now? So.
But you're learning, and that's the trick.
Well, that's it. You keep creating, and as director of formation, when we had our sessions and everybody showed up excited, I thought, okay, this will work. I mean, I miss seeing people in person. That's the piece that I hope we can soon recover, but at any rate,
Okay,
thank you.
thank you.
Yeah.
And Kathy, one or two more,
Yeah,
and then we'll move on.
again, Melinda is saying that their RCIA has started. They've got 16 students. And Keith said he just got 2 new inquirers today. So it does sound like there are, it's the hunger for the spirituality is there. People, when everything else seems to be in chaos, they need to be grounded.
Can I ask something?
Mhm.
So we're experiencing a lot, and we're hearing a lot is from lay ecclesial ministers especially, is a lot of anxiety and fear in terms of the future, not because of their creativity, because they just don't know if they're going to have a job, or and you mentioned, people are, the staff, there's been reductions. My own parish, we saw a couple people, they had to reorganize the staff, and some of the staff members, their jobs increased. And that was part, we got a new pastor, and but it was mostly during COVID. And even at the diocesan level, with bankruptcies going on, there's just a lot of anxiety, more so than there has been in years past. You want to speak to that, or I don't know if there's.
Well, I don't think there's a nice answer to that one. And I think that we have to care for one another in this. Because that is real, and those are real concerns. And I'm a little dismayed at how much that is happening. My own parish, the parish secretary now is running the formation program, and the formation person is gone. So we just have to continue. I don't have a nice answer, Keith. It is really a concern.
I think it's going to be going on for quite a while.
It was almost like this was an excuse to do it. Ellen, do you have one quick thing before we?
I just wanted to comment about Marty's question about, comments earlier about opening the doors to everyone, regardless of who they are and what their needs are. And before COVID began, we ran a retreat in our cluster for all the women of the cluster, and 60 women came, and there were 2 non-Catholics that came because somebody said, well, it's for women, you can come, you don't have to be a Catholic. And now both of those women are in formation to come into the church because they started watching the live stream masses every Sunday, and just paying attention, and they just have turned around so completely. So you do need to open the doors to everybody, because it has a tremendous impact, because they felt so much a part of that.
That's beautiful. And multiple entry points.
Yeah, and we made a vow that if someone comes forward and wants to come to the church, we start RCIA with them that day, one-on-one. We'll find you a sponsor, and we will get you started, because Father does not want to wait and put everybody on a calendar. We got to make it happen.
All right, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen now. Okay, so in the midst of all that's happening, I want to end with the case for hope. Individually, we're dealing with a lot of trauma and pain, but I think overall, there is a case for hope. Even in the face of everything, we know as a church, we've long since discovered that we are at our best as a church when we're willing to see through new eyes, reimagining who and what we are about. As we struggle with today's crisis, some are beginning to see things differently. We're realizing the need to go out to people rather than waiting for them to arrive at the church door. Like Ellen, your example of going out and letting the community people join you. Walls are starting to come down. There's a subtle shift in who is perceived as essential in providing leadership, a shift in who needs the attention of the church. Those who have been long invisible, surviving on the edge of church and society are seen as both hero and victim. There's a new felt need to work together. Parish leaders are discovering the interconnectedness and importance of everyone as we each use our gifts to move through these difficult times. So we're being called then to rethink and reimagine our pastoral world. Spirit is calling us to reimagine how we work together to care for God's people. So the question for us tonight is how lay ecclesial ministers in our particular positions and skill sets can be part of that answer. You know as well as I do that we are long used to working directly with parishioners. We are finding ourselves in unprecedented positions to actually lead the way towards a post-pandemic parish if we have the imagination to do so. What then do lay ecclesial ministers bring to this time? I'm going to make 3 suggestions. I think. There we go. The gift of presence. As we accompany our community as experience these traumas, we know how we have the relational skills to walk with and accompany our communities. We have the ability to further develop relationships, like those rounds of phone calls. We bring the gifts of mercy and compassion. We stand in solidarity with the suffering. Studies have shown that collective trauma must be dealt with for a parish to move forward and to grow spiritually. Care must be taken to respect and bring mercy to those in grief over the loss of loved ones, job, income, and the safety those provide. It is with compassion that we walk with those who mourn injustice and the suffering caused by racism, which is also calling for healing in this momentous time. So how do we bring the mercy of the gospel to those in need? Lay ecclesial ministers formed in the gospel and the deep traditions of our faith are able to share these much needed gifts with those they find who find themselves discouraged, angry, or hopeless. And finally, the gift of hope. The gift of being a living sign of hope, which I believe in which the bishops have called the gracious gift of the Spirit. I'd like to share with you a thought that I've learned from Karl Rahner, the theologian, because it is through hope that we listen for the invitation of the Spirit at this time. Christian hope, according to Karl Rahner, there it is, reorients the believer's engagement in social and political life. In committing ourselves to the incomprehensible God, believers must decide anew, each one of us, whether we are to defend the present, which we already possess and know about, or embark upon the exodus into an unforeseeable future. Hope then is reorienting us. How are we to engage in social and political life in our time? This is the question everybody's asking. In this incomprehensible God, we're being asked to decide, is it going to be like it always has been, or is there something different we're being invited to? Hope then, he goes on, is the courage to commit ourselves in both thought and deed to the incomprehensible and uncontrollable which permeates our existence, and as the future to which it opens, sustain it. Hope takes courage. The way we think and the way we act in these incomprehensible and uncontrollable times. Can we commit ourselves to a future that is there for us? It will take a change of heart to let go of the old ways, looking only to the few, which we've done for so long, and realizing maybe that many are given the ability to lead us into a post-COVID world. In this great moment in history, we are called to follow the wisdom Pope Francis offered us. I invite everyone to be bold and creative in this task of rethinking the objectives, the structures, the style, and the methods to evangelize communities. Pope Francis, calling us to be bold and creative in rethinking what we're about. We've done this before, lay ecclesial ministers. I've watched us. I watched us through the trauma of the clergy abuse crisis. I watched us quietly, one after another, and without fanfare, go back to our ministry of caring for the people of God, no matter how bad we personally were impacted and hurt by the abuse crises. Nobody ever talked about that, but we did. As we go forward and commit ourselves to this incomprehensible future then, what do we do now? Can we ask with honor? I love this. Not how far is the church obliged to go in responding to the new situations, but how far could it go in exploiting all the theological and pastoral possibilities out there? It's not a matter of, okay, what do we got to do now? What are we obliged to do now? Okay, we'll do that. No, let us ask with honor, how far can we go? How far can we push those margins and open those doors in exploiting all the possibilities available to us? I believe that lay ecclesial ministers not only bring hope of God's sustaining presence to those with whom they minister, I think they are in fact themselves living signs of hope, which are a gracious gift of the Spirit. Lay ecclesial ministers themselves are the living signs of hope that God provides for us in every era with all that we need. We believe this. We've always believed this, that God will always give us what we need. And I truly believe that in this time in the life of the church, God has given us lay ecclesial ministers. We not only bring that hope, but we are that hope. We need the gifts, the education, the power, the collaboration, and the leadership of the lay ecclesial ministers who have accepted their baptismal call to care for the church. This is indeed an unanticipated future, but I think that we are ready. Can we believe what Isaiah tells us? See, I am doing something new. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? So I wish you all well. These are difficult times. I think we need to explore the difficult questions in front of us, the theological questions, as well as the pastoral ones. But I believe in us and I believe in the future to which we have been invited. So thank you. It's great to be with you tonight.
And thank you, Marty. And do you want to flip to the, yes. We want to acknowledge FADICA, who worked so wonderfully with Marty and with Mark on this project, and the support that they give to all those who are in lay ministry and lay organizations, and they've been a huge support for NALM. And our sponsors, Catholic Theological Union, there in Chicago, where we had moved our office from Washington, D.C., and we actually had an office space at CTU for a while, that have done such a wonderful job of supporting us in all of our ministries. And the Catholic Apostolate Center that forms missionary disciples and church leaderships. And through all of this digital resources, I think they're somebody that we need to tap into more as we move forward into this uncharted territory. And Conspirita, cooperating with the Spirit, developing Jesus-like leaders in this time where we have to develop new kinds of leadership. And so Conspirita is there to help us with that. And of course, Select International, that had to, God bless them, they had to cancel all of their different pilgrimages over this past year. But this gives us a chance to start setting aside our pennies for those 2022 pilgrimages that, maybe that trip of a lifetime, that pilgrimage that we've always wanted to do. So please keep Select International in mind when hopefully we can break loose and actually cross a border and be able to go someplace else. And then anytime, if times are tough, money's tight, But if you can just help a little bit to help NOM be able to sustain things like these presentations and all of the wonderful work that NOM does in support and advocacy for the lay ministers. And if you are not current in your membership, here's a little nudge to get you there. We have memberships from anywhere from a full membership of $95 down to those of us who are retired at $35. And if there's anyone out there that you want to invite to join us on this journey and to see what this new church is going to look like.